All right, so today is February 19th, 2018. I'm Erin Conlon interviewing Robert Mutchnick about his experience relating to the three-day strike in October 2016 at IUP, one of the 14 schools that make up the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education, which is known as PASHE. The strike occurred due to an expired contract and stalled negotiations between the state system and the Association of Pennsylvania and State College University Faculties, or APSCUF. And in full disclosure, I have to note that I am a faculty member on campus who supported the strike and walked on the picketing line. So I come at it with a very particular experience as well. So would you mind, for the record, just stating your name and spelling it so we get everything correct?
Okay, Robert Mutchnick. That's Mutchnick.
Great, thank you. So what I was hoping to do is start by just getting a little bit about your own background information. I was actually curious just in terms of how you had even gotten into criminology and coming to IUP, just to sort of get a take on where you were coming from with your history.
All right, I grew up in New York City, went to one of the City University of New York colleges. In fact, it was Hunter College when I started. And I was a sociology major, and there was no criminology to major in, or criminal justice at the time. That was back in the 1960s. And I took a class called Probation and Parole from a federal probation officer, and got really interested in the subject matter based on the way he taught it. And when I graduated with my undergraduate in Soc, I decided to pursue a master's and a doctorate in criminology. And at the time, there were only 4 or 5 schools in the country that offered PhDs in that subject, and I went to the one that offered me the most money.
A wise choice.
Which was Florida State University.
Okay.
Earned my master's and my doctorate from them. Taught for a couple of years at Florida A&M University, which is the historically black institution in Florida, a state school. Taught there for a couple of years, then went on to teach. I was very interested in staying in public higher education. I went to Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia, stayed there for 5 years, and after 3 years with absolutely no raises of any kind, because the state was broke, on the advice of the then Attorney General of the state of West Virginia, who I knew, I left the state of West Virginia and joined the faculty at IUP, where I've been this is my 36th year.
Okay. I remembered reading that it had been quite a long tenure here.
My 36th year here.
That's great.
So 43rd year overall as a faculty member, 36th year at the moment.
Okay. And we have the Florida connection. My degree is from the University of Florida. So
from the swamp, okay.
Exactly. So I was wondering, kind of in building on that, that you've been here at IUP for quite a long time. Were you involved in the union from the very beginning when you got to campus? Was that?
Not for the first couple of years. I was obviously more concerned about my tenure and my promotion, and I didn't know much about the union. I joined the union, and I've always been a union member. But I got active in the union probably about 3 or 4 years after I joined the faculty. And I started attending and representing the department and things of that nature in rep council, and then slowly got involved at the state level.
And what inspired you to get more involved over time, or what drew you in?
Well, first of all, a real concern for my colleagues, and I'm a strong believer in unions, coming from a union background. My father was a member of the Amalgamated Meat Cutters Union in New York, and in fact, his brother-in-law, my uncle, was one of the founding members of the Amalgamated Meat Cutters Union. And he used to stand on the subway platforms in New York City and hold a card in front of the person he was trying to get to sign up, and he would explain to them that if they didn't sign the card and join the union, they might have an accidental trip and fall in front of the subway car as it came by. So he was pretty successful at getting people to join the union. My mother was a member of the UFT, United Federation of Teachers, in New York, and under Albert Shanker. So my mother was a hardcore union member, as was my father. So I come to it with an honest background.
Yeah, and I was going to touch on this later, but I actually had a question about that. In terms of, coming from a strong union family, did they see you in this, higher this academic, more elite type of setting as having, I don't know, sort of the same union experience, or do they see that as a shared experience in that way, or was there...
My mother certainly did.
Okay.
As a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in New York City. My father, probably not so much in terms of, because it was a very different kind of experience for him. But for my mother, yes, she certainly understood it in a similar kind of vein.
Okay. And then I was wondering, in terms of, sort of, you talked about the kind of building trajectory of getting more involved with the union, over time. And thinking about, like, what skills do you sort of identify as being really important for union leadership?
That's a very interesting question. I don't know that there are any set skills. There are lots of different people who are actively involved in the union and bring to the table very different kinds of experiences, different kinds of skills. They come out of all sorts of backgrounds and experiences, and I think there's a place for everybody to fit. I don't think there's any one design, but I will tell you this, what the union had and still has back when I got involved was that they had a leadership workshop where they identified on each campus a certain group of people who were new to the union, who had aspirations for involvement, and they sent us to a 3-day workshop run by the union to explain to us all the different facets of the union, places we could become involved, and things that we could do to enhance our skills. And I went to that, and actually the other people who went to it at the same time from IUP also got very heavily involved and took active roles in the leadership of our local.
Do they still run the workshop? I haven't
Periodically.
Okay.
Periodically they do. They don't do it every year, but they periodically run it.
And then, as part of that, I guess sort of a follow-up question is, have you noticed some of your own skills that you've developed, right, in time with doing different positions? And I guess maybe this is a good opportunity as well to ask about, sort of what your responsibilities were at different stages of involvement.
I started out at the state level serving as the parliamentarian for the legislative assemblies, the council that is the actual policy-making body, and it had representatives from all 14 campuses, and they would get together 3 to 4 times a year to discuss policy, discuss negotiations, anything else that related to the functioning of the union. And I served as parliamentarian for about 7 or 8 years of that group, and then because I was parliamentarian, I was not elected and I did not have a vote. I was appointed, so I was supposed to stay neutral, which was fine by me. But then after about 7 or 8 years of that, I actually ran for a position and got elected to represent my campus as an actual member of Legislative Assembly. So I stepped down from the role of parliamentarian and became a voting member of the body. And at that point I was taking on more roles at the local level as well. And I started to serve on the local, what's called Meet and Discuss, which is a group of APSCUF representatives, usually about anywhere from 5 to 10, who sit at one side of the table once a month, and management sits on the other side of the table, and we're supposed to address and try to resolve issues locally, if we can, that are not in conflict with the contract. From there, I started getting more active at the state level. At one point, in 2006, I was asked to serve on the statewide negotiations team, representing the 14 schools, and there was about 8 or 10 of us that negotiated for over a year a contract for the over 5,000 faculty. And that was a lot of learning, a lot of time spent, penned up in hotel conference rooms with my team. I was not the leader of the team, I was a member of the team, and that was a great learning experience. I was not satisfied with the end result, but I was outvoted by my colleagues on the team, and the contract was ratified and passed. I wanted us to strike. At the same time, around that time, I was the local chapter president at IUP you can serve a maximum of 2 terms, 2-year terms for 4 years as local chapter president. I served all 4 years, and during that time period we took a vote of no confidence in Tony Atwater, who was the president of the university at that point, and that was a real learning experience. And within a couple of months after we took the vote of no confidence, he was gone. So we were probably one of the few schools in the state system who actually were successful with the outcome of the vote of no confidence. But that was probably the biggest single important activity of the time I was president, was to try to remove a university president who we actually felt was extremely detrimental to the well-being of the institution.
Yeah. In terms of sort of, the way the union has, the role I guess maybe it's played on campus, throughout your tenure here, have you noticed times where people seem to be more engaged and more active, and then times where maybe it's, pulling teeth to get people to run for offices? And I was just kind of curious, how that would compare with the period around the strike, maybe even compared to now.
There's always a core of faculty who at the heart of it are very interested in the union, whether there's conflict on the table at the moment or whether things are smooth sailing. There's always a good core of faculty. This institution has done an excellent job since the time I've been here of bringing young faculty, newer faculty into the fold, educating them, preparing them to step up and take leadership roles, because we don't have positions in perpetuity. There are some campuses like Westchester where the chapter president of Westchester has been chapter president for like 20 years.
Okay.
At one point, not this moment in time, but they were there for 20 years, which doesn't allow for the transition of new people or the opportunity for people to see a light at the end of the tunnel for why they would become involved. Mm-hmm. But we've had a very strict policy, and that policy has really enabled us to prepare people to step up and take leadership roles.
Okay.
So we haven't had a problem with that.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, how people move into positions, and when you were talking about acting as one of the negotiators as well, and thinking about the skills that you would need, right, and being so well versed in the issues. And I was, starting to think about how long does it normally take for negotiations in terms of that process? You said you'd been negotiating for a year.
For over a year we were negotiating. When they negotiated and we went on strike, they had been at it for over a year. Because look, it's been in the state's, PASCUF's best interest. When our contract expires, it's been in their best interest not to reach closure for at least a year. And then they turn around and say, well, that year's over, you don't need a raise for that year, and they save whatever they would have expended. And as long as we've been willing to negotiate that way, we've cost ourselves that first year raise for a long period of time. And when you figure that gets compounded over the life of a faculty member, that 0% raise for that year winds up being extremely costly, but very beneficial to the state. So that's been a pattern we've tried to break with the state, okay. And we've been a little more successful recently, because since we went on strike, they now know we can actually deliver the strike. Before, we were like the boy who cried wolf.
Yeah.
And we never showed them the wolf. Well, finally, with the strike, here's the wolf, and we're serious about this.
Yeah. Yeah, so as part of deciding what are the issues that need to be addressed for each contract, is that something that, how does the hierarchy of that work in terms of how those issues get pushed forward among the 14 schools and addressed?
There's a survey typically that's sent out to the union members, asking them to identify the issues that are of primary concern to them. Typically, the same types of issues rise to the top. People are concerned about their pay. They're concerned about their benefits, specifically health benefits. They're concerned about the issues of retrenchment, especially on those campuses that have lost enrollments and therefore have then had faculty in jeopardy with their positions. So there are certain things that tend to regularly bubble to the top. PASCUF has to be willing to also negotiate the issue. If they refuse to negotiate on issue X, there's not a lot you can do to try to leverage them. I mean, there are things you can do, but you can't force their hand. But oftentimes, all the things that they're interested in are bottom line things, and how they feed that bottom line, and how they can save money or reduce their costs, or at least not increase their costs any more than absolutely necessary. So those are typically, monetary things are typically the things that get addressed most frequently.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was curious, and it's kind of, as I look through my questions that I have, I'll jump ahead a little bit. But one of the things I was really thinking about was the framing of the strike to the general public. And we saw in Working Days a lot of the conversation around how to make sure that the conversation was around the quality of education that was being offered, and that, retaining good faculty is by having good benefits and, a comparable pay scale for what people are doing. And I was wondering if you could maybe speak more to some of the challenges in terms of that messaging, especially, we live in an area that is predominantly blue-collar workers who sometimes I think feel a bit of animosity towards what they see as being kind of an elitist institution. And just wondering how you guys sort of approached that.
There's certainly, for the most part, a real pay differential between what university faculty are paid. Not that we're overpaid, but many of our colleagues, our blue-collar colleagues in the community, are underpaid for what they do. So I understand that they would wonder, why would you go on strike? We would love to have your salary, your benefits, your everything, etc. The problem is that we are competing in an environment with institutions not only across the state within the system, we're competing with other schools, universities in Pennsylvania that are not part of PASCI, Penn State, for example. We're competing across state borders with schools in Ohio and Maryland, etc., and we're competing nationwide for quality individuals. All right, and those other schools are more than willing to poach the best people we have. So the question becomes, how do you maintain the ones you have? How do you attract new faculty? You have to be competitive, and it's difficult for us, given we're in a very rural location where right now a lot of faculty are partners with other people who are professionals and are looking for opportunities as well. And we don't have the ability, like a large major metropolitan area, to say, oh, well, if you come, there are all these other opportunities for your significant other.
Yeah.
It's difficult. So it's harder for us to even attract and at times to keep good quality faculty. I have a faculty member here in my department who was hired 2 years ago. He's a brilliant young man. His wife completed her PhD in classics. She can't find work. And he's already come to me and said, look, we want to stay, we love this area, but she needs to be fulfilled in terms of her career, and I certainly understand that and support that. It may be that we wind up losing both of them. Yeah. So how do you sell that to the community? To come back around to your question, it's difficult. It's very difficult. So we tried to make the whole issue over the strike the quality of education, not the salaries, not the benefits for the faculty, but the quality of what we were delivering to our students, full-time faculty as opposed to part-time. If you look at the trend nationwide, the trend is certainly towards part-time faculty who don't get benefits, who have to cobble together teaching at 3-4 institutions to try to make a living wage. So therefore they're not here to do service. They're not here to support the students outside of the classroom. They're not here to help the university function in other ways when you go to part-time people. So we've tried to hold the line on part-time and go with full-time and tenure track slots and things of that nature that will enhance the quality of the education that we provide to our students. That was the theme. And actually we were very fortunate that the students came out in strong support of the faculty, and their families came out in strong support of the faculty. So we had, I think PASCI was shocked at the kind of support we had, and I think the support, especially of the students, helped to bring a quicker closure to the strike in a reasonable way that was beneficial to all.
Yeah, it was remarkable to see the number of students that came out, and I was curious, if that support would have lasted had the strike gone on longer. And I was wondering, when you came back as sort of the leadership within APSCUF, if there were conversations about sort of contingency plans, like what happens if this continues? How do we maintain support from the public and from our students and from having a good relationship with the administration?
Listen, let me paint even a more potentially problematic scenario. How long could we keep the faculty on the line? How long could faculty go without a paycheck? How long could faculty go giving up their health benefits? All right? We were very fortunate. The plan was to put people out on strike, to have everybody there the first 3-4 days in a real show of force. But if we were going to go longer, we were going to have to back off to a much smaller group being on the line, because we couldn't ask the people to be there day in, day out, week in, week out. And we were hoping that it would be a short strike. We didn't know it would be as short as it was. Thankfully it was. But could we have maintained it? I don't know. That's a tough question. And for a week, maybe. Much longer, I'm not sure.
Okay. I remembered hearing rumors that some of the more established faculty had talked about putting together essentially a fund to help, as you had mentioned, some of the new hires, people who are coming in, and I didn't really know the details of that, so I wondered if you could speak to that at all, if that was actually true. Or
we did that for a number of years.
Okay.
When we had threatened previously to go on strike, Faye Bradwick, who's a retired professor from the College of Business, she was a tax professor and a lawyer. She had come to APSCUF and years ago had talked about setting up a fund where senior faculty, people who were full professor, top of the line, who had established themselves and could help to support new, young faculty who, from a financial standpoint, the stress of the strike might be more than they could handle. Look, if you take a new faculty member, I told you we hired 3 new faculty in August, and here it was October, they were asked to go on strike. They had just moved to Indiana, Pennsylvania. They had all sorts of out-of-pocket expenses. They certainly didn't have time to build up any kind of sizable savings account or anything, and we were asking them to give up their paycheck and their benefits. The focus of the kind of thing that you're referring to was a fund that senior faculty would donate money. Oh, actually not donate, because the goal was they would get it back, but it would go to junior faculty who needed to pay a rent or mortgage payment or car payment or student loan or something of that nature, and it would go interest-free. And at one point, we had locally collected pledges of $120,000 to help offset for some of the younger, newer faculty who might need assistance. We found out, though, that kind of fund was illegal, that there are things that prohibit the collection of money in that way and the distribution of money. So it then became something that was going to be a more one-on-one between faculty who were willing and faculty who needed.
Okay.
But after 3 days, we never got to that point.
Yeah, no, it's great that it didn't go to that, but I recalled hearing things about it, and so I was sort of wondering.
Yeah, it wasn't formalized during this strike the way it had been previously when we were anticipating a strike, because we found out we wanted to do it at the state level, and that's when we found out that APSCUF couldn't do it. Okay. And therefore we couldn't run the money through APSCUF here locally.
Okay. And as part of that, I know, at least on our campus, we had the vast majority of people who did support the strike, and there was only a handful that had crossed over. But I was wondering, for some of the people who chose to cross over, if it was around some of those issues, like having access to health care, or if we know the reasons, or if you guys had ever collected any data on that.
Anecdotal.
Okay.
Anecdotal data. I know from a couple of people who I've spoken to who did cross the line, some of them just said they will not strike under any circumstances. It didn't matter what the reasons were, they refused to strike. One of them claimed that they were there for their students. This would harm their students. Even though when they showed up to class, there were no students there, the students were honoring the strike. Faculty can justify it in a whole host of ways. I think that it was more important to be supportive of my colleagues who felt the necessity to strike. And clearly, I think out of just about 700 faculty, you're right, we had a handful that crossed the picket line. And we know who they are, and they have to live with that decision.
Have you heard anything, either anecdotally or through any complaints around APSCUF, of tensions within departments then with people who did have that, right? Because I feel like, departments, you become kind of that strange relationship where these are partners for life in many cases.
I've heard, but again, just pure rumor. I can tell you my department, criminology, everybody was on the line. Mm-hmm. There was not one person who crossed the picket line. So we didn't have anything in this department, and most of the departments, the people, it was 100% on the line. It wasn't. It was like I said, out of 700 faculty, it was less than 10 that crossed the picket line.
And then I was curious, the other side of that is thinking also about the relationship with the administration. And at least from what I recall hearing is that we had at IUP a very good functional relationship with our administration. And I was wondering how that compared to other PASHE schools, or if you knew any sort of information about what made ours better or worse than other places?
Well, first of all, we took the position, and I think rightfully so, that if we were to strike, it wasn't against local administration. This was a strike against PASHE in Harrisburg. This was a statement against the chancellor and his folks, not against Michael Driscoll, our local president, or his administrative team here at IUP. And we made that not only clear to our colleagues on campus, we made it clear to the local administration. We also set up what has become known as the No Name Committee, which is a committee that consists of 3 faculty and 3 administrators. And that committee met prior to the strike and agreed to meet during the strike to address issues so that if there was a strike, things could be maintained as normal as possible. For example, depending upon the discipline you're in, especially in the sciences, there are lots of lab animals. If the strike went on for an extended period of time, how are those lab animals going to be attended to? Fed, cages cleaned, things maintained, temperature-wise, etc., to keep those experiments that are ongoing in good stead, especially if you're under a grant from a National Science Foundation or something else. The last thing you want to do is report to them, oh, we're sorry, all our animals died, and we've got to start over. We also have a faculty member on campus who's the hazmat person. If there happened to be a spill of some kind, we certainly would want that properly contained and no harm coming to anybody, be it the staff who were required to cross the picket line, be it administrators who were required to cross the picket line. Okay? They had no choice. So we had concern for their well-being as well. That's just 2 examples. And so we worked out with administration all of the details about how those things were going to be handled. They were very accepting of those kinds of things. And we discussed how they were going to ascertain who was in class, who wasn't in class, etc. So we knew all those things up front. And they worked, I will say this, local management worked very cooperatively with our union leadership to make the strike that we knew when it was over, we would again have to work together, and we didn't want to harm what we thought was already a positive relationship. Other campuses weren't so fortunate. In fact, on other campuses, there's still animosity. There's still problems between the management and the faculty leadership on other campuses because they didn't take kindly to the strike.
Yeah. I was wondering for the where you said, that administrators and staff had to cross the picket line. I mean, they were contractually obligated to do that as well. I recall hearing that the Teamsters had said that they would not be delivering and they wouldn't cross the picket line. And did that actually ever become an issue?
We reached out to the various unions that might have an influence on campus, that might be involved in the teardown of Keith Hall or the other kinds of things that were taking place. And we got support from many of those unions that they would not cross the picket line. However, not crossing the picket line didn't mean that deliveries couldn't take place somewhere off campus, and then the maintenance people would drive the supplies onto campus. There was nothing we could do about that kind of thing. But at least we knew the trucks run by the Teamsters wouldn't come on campus.
Okay. And in terms of other unions in the area that supported, I know that several did. Do you recall some of the ones in particular that really stood out as being particularly supportive?
Well, the Teamsters were certainly one. The Steelworkers were another. We had some unions come up from Pittsburgh that were supportive of us. I'm honestly having trouble off the top of my head remembering the names of the different unions. But we got a lot of support. We also got a lot of support from local businesses, because especially around campus, a lot of the local businesses were harmed financially because people weren't going there for lunch. People weren't frequenting those local businesses. So the union made a concerted effort when we were trying to feed the faculty on the line to purchase items from the local businesses. Some of them were very, very gracious, brought food out. Pita Pit uptown, without any impetus from us, showed up on the line with sandwiches and gave them out to the faculty on the line in support of the faculty. That kind of thing. So we had a lot of local support.
Yeah, I recalled seeing as well that in Workin' Days, the Journal, they had mentioned working with the local police department as well in terms of to make sure it was a secure and safe.
Well,
striking area.
We met as part of the preparation. We met with the local police department. Bill Sutton, who is the police chief. This is not the first time we've worked with him. Previously, it was for the potential of a strike. Now it was also for the potential, but we worked with him. We had discussions about what constitutes legal picketing. We wanted to make sure that we were on the same page so that our people could be then properly instructed about where they could picket, under what conditions they could picket, etc., so that they would not be in violation of the law. Where does the university property begin and end? Those kinds of things. Where's private property? Because we couldn't be on private property that's adjacent to the university. So we had all these things worked out with the local police, with the whole idea that we would try to problem solve as opposed to trying to work our way through a justice system unnecessarily. We also had to make sure that students were not allowed to be on the picket line. Okay, we could not allow them to be on the picket line because we could not accept responsibility for their behavior.
Okay.
If something happened and they acted out in some manner, APSCUF would have been held responsible. So to minimize our potential liability, when you're dealing with faculty, you're dealing with adults who all have a common cause. You're dealing sometimes with students. You don't know, there are lots of other agendas. And therefore, since we couldn't control all those agendas, it was in our best interest not to let them join the picket line. But they came out, they brought food, they brought moral support, they did everything. They made signs for us. They did all sorts of things. The band came out and played, to support us. So we had lots and lots of student support. We just couldn't have them on the picket line with us.
Did graduate students who have teaching responsibilities, I couldn't recall,
had to cross the picket line.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did that work?
If you were a teaching associate, you had no choice but to cross the picket line. If you were a temporary faculty member, even if you were a graduate student, you could picket. Okay? We expected you to picket. The ones who had to cross were teaching associates. Okay. They had no option.
Yeah, I thought I remembered hearing something
Yeah,
about
and
that.
we understood all of that, and certainly you can't penalize people who did not have the choice. The same way that staff didn't have a choice. You know?
Yeah.
So
I was going to go back to a point you had made where you said that there was the no-name committee that was sort of working on these issues behind the scenes. And I recall reading in the journal as well, it had talked about, and I remember hearing this when I was picketing, that, there were back channel negotiations that started as part of that to then try to, bring the strike to a close. And I was just wondering, who that is.
Jamie, that's the negotiations team.
Okay.
That's Jamie Martin, and that would have been Ken Mash, involved in whatever back channels with people out of the chancellor's office, and that did not involve the local campus.
Okay. And then I was also just wondering, in terms of like the structure for it, how the state system works, where you've got the chancellor, and because my understanding, right, is that Frank Brogan was our chancellor during that. He has subsequently left, and that we have a new interim chancellor. And I was sort of wondering, in terms of the going forward stage of it, is the chancellor really pivotal to the sort of success or failure of negotiations, or does it end up really being a much larger body that the negotiations are happening with, or is it?
Depends on the chancellor.
Okay.
Depends on the chancellor and the way the chancellor's attitude about public higher education and their role. One of the problems Frank Brogan had was Frank Brogan was not truly an advocate for the state system of higher education. He did not spend the requisite amount of time up on the Hill in Harrisburg meeting with legislators, talking about the needs of the state system, etc. In fact, there were times when he went and made a financial request of gave the budget for PASSCI, that the budget was minuscule in comparison to what was really needed. Never even took into account, any potential negotiations for salary raises or anything else. So why he did that, what his attitude was, I thought, and I have no definite proof of this, I think his goal was to break the union. I thought that if he felt he could break the union, it would be his meal ticket to bigger and better things. Well, in point of fact, after 3 days of strike, he broke. And that's why it didn't take long afterwards for him to be leaving, because he had overplayed his hand. Okay. That's my opinion. But I think it's a reasonably fair one.
And in terms of sort of an outlook looking forward, does APSCUF have a sense of what the future looks like? I mean, because we negotiated, or there's the 1-year contract that was sort of an extension, if I understood correctly, and then the negotiation process are beginning for, in theory, another 5-year contract. Like, do we have an idea of what the future looks like?
It all depends upon the financial well-being of the state.
I suppose we have not agreed on a budget for the state yet, so
that's
pretty
unclear. The financial well-being of the state, when they're not willing to tax the fracking. When you had a governor previous to the current one who was unwilling to raise any taxes of any kind, it makes it very difficult for the state coffers to be flush enough. We got cut dramatically by the previous governor, not Wolf. Wolf has been trying slowly to restore, but we're still, in terms of the total dollars that we receive, if I'm not mistaken, the total dollars we receive put us back at around $1995. Okay? You can't grow a system when you're constantly trying to figure out how to balance a budget and where you can cut. And that's what Mike Driscoll, I think, has tried to do a very good job locally, but his job every year so far has been to figure out where to come up with the shortfall in the budget without cutting faculty positions. And when you're doing that, there isn't a lot of room to think about how you grow and enhance and improve when you're trying to figure out how do you survive. So what's the future? It all depends upon the future financially of the state.
Yeah, and we have not at this point received any word about
No,
the
we're
state
putting in.
budget, correct?
No, we don't
So-
know at this point.
Okay.
And we're putting in for a budget with an increase, and Wolf is asking for an increase for the state system, but we don't have any idea what the end game will look like in terms of it.
And does APSCUF have any opinions or sway over, who the next chancellor would be? And
I wish we did, but my understanding is we don't even have a faculty member on the search committee.
okay.
So they've conveniently bypassed faculty input into the process. If that's accurate, which I believe it is, they've conveniently bypassed us in the process.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
Yeah, and that's why
what do you do with it?
wasn't sure sort of where we stood at this point, kind of the moving forward part. In terms of sort of, your overall experience with it, you had mentioned that you had wanted to strike, previous times, or at least one previous time when you were helping to negotiate. And this is, I think, the first time that it had actually gone into effect. And
Absolutely.
And just kind of getting a sense for, did you feel at this point that it was the time, like it had to happen, compared to other moments? Or?
Well, I think that this was really one of the first times, and I'll give Ken Mash, the state president, credit, as well as Jamie Martin, the state vice president, both of them a level of credit, because I think that you had to have all 14 of the institutions be ready to go, be willing to go. In past, there were some institutions that were not quite ready. They were far more content with things, the status quo. And we weren't always sure that they would go on strike with us. And we could have been undermined, if half the schools went on strike and half the schools didn't go on strike, now you've got a very weak job action. So this time, I think they did a much better job of lining up all 14 schools and getting all 14 schools on the same page and ready to go. And it made a big difference.
In terms of our current political climate and sort of trying to kind of do a forecast of the future, do you think that this is going to become the new norm, right? That there's
strikes?
Yeah, that it's going to become more contentious moving forward. As you said, there's always sort of
No, actually, I think I have hope for just the opposite. And the reason I have hope for just the opposite is that once we finally showed them that we're capable of actually bringing things to a complete halt, plus we were capable of getting the students and their families on our side, so the pressure was much more on PASSCI than it was on us. I think that's one of the things that led to very quickly the 1-year contract extension so that we could try to move forward. This will be the test. If they go back to their old behaviors, then I think we are going to be more likely to see another strike in the near future. But, like I said, I have hope that they got the message loud and clear that we're very serious and we're capable. And if they do, I don't think, that doesn't mean we'll get everything we want.
Yeah.
They're not just going to roll over, but I think we'll have a more sensible and reasonable negotiation process. At least I hope so.
Yeah. So I think I went through pretty much almost all the questions that I had written down. Are there things that stand out to you that I'm missing or that I should be asking about, or kind of final thoughts that you would want to share?
Yeah, I think that I didn't anticipate it prior to the strike, but I certainly was very pleasantly surprised at the atmosphere and attitude of the faculty after the strike, that they felt that they were successful, they felt accomplished in what they had set out to do, and I think it created a camaraderie among faculty that we didn't always have before. That it brought different groups together in a way that allowed us to act as a whole, and I think the strike had a very beneficial effect in that regard.
Yeah, I can at least say from personal experience, being able to walk around and talk with people that you might see in passing, but there was definitely some quality miles pounding pavement together and finding out what people study and what they do and what they enjoy. And
those relationships, at least you know now some of those people, you see those people, you hello to those people, it creates a whole different environment. So I think there was some rich benefits that the job action actually provided that weren't necessarily anticipated.
Yeah. Great. Well, anything else you can think of?
No, I just hope that for future generations, they don't have to go through this, that there can be labor peace. It would be very nice to have labor peace, but only if we're able to get sensible and reasonable contracts that allow people to do the things that they're brought here to do. Their teaching, first and foremost, their scholarship, and their service.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
I don't know if that's what you were looking for.
Yeah. No, it was just a chance to find out a little bit more sort of about what people remember and what they valued and what they were thinking about. And yeah, just to kind of get a nice kind of perspective to fill in some of the archival details.
Yeah, Jamie Martin will be able to do a lot more.
Well, and I figure
having
she's
been
got,
on the state negotiations
more
team.
of the specifics, but it's still good to get other sort of leadership people who have perspectives on what the experience was like, and things that worked well or things that they would do differently the next time. So I know Nadine certainly commented on some of that in her piece as well.
Yeah, she and I have talked about what we would do differently.
Is there anything that really stands out to you that you think would be an area for improvement or completely different?
Completely different. Well, in terms of some of the nitty-gritty things, I don't think we needed to be ringing the campus the way we did. I think we could have more centralized locations and be more effective that way. I think working more closely with some of the local businesses to try to prevent harm to them is important as well. I think overall, though, I was very pleased with the relationship we had with the university because, let me give you an example. We weren't supposed to be on campus at all, period. But we could, in the previous years when we were talking about going on strike, St. Thomas More Church said that we could use their parking lot. But there were some things going on that prevented us from using their parking lot, even though they've been very generous with us. We wound up parking on campus. We wound up parking in the Robert Shaw parking lot in the very back. And APSCUF, which are retired faculty, APSCUF members actually served as the shuttle service, taking faculty from the parking lot, bringing them over to their places on the picket line. And even though we weren't supposed to be on campus, we used the back couple of rows of the parking lot with the permission of the university. So they knew we were on campus, we knew we were on campus, but everybody turned a blind eye because administration was as supportive of us as they could be.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a good thing. But nope. I wish you well with your oral history project.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and thank you for your time. It was so nice to, again,
pleasure.
finally get to meet you in person.
What's your area specialty?